Is that large enough for you? I tried to make it large enough. And be it further enacted that if any person shall write, print, utter, or publish, or shall cause or procure to be written, printed, uttered, or published, or shall knowingly and willingly assist or aid in writing, printing, uttering, or publishing any false, scandalous, or malicious writing or writings against the government of the United States, shall be punished by a fine not exceeding $2,000 and by imprisonment of 2 years. Putting a gag on the press. Because John just didn't like the way they were talking about him. The government shall make how many laws? None. Now look, I mean, I can't guess your age, and frankly, you're not going to guess mine, but the press can go down a rabbit hole real quickly. But we have a free press. You've never been in a country, I'm assuming you haven't, where there's no free press. People sometimes slander the country and say, oh, we have state-run media. No, we don't, people. I've been in countries where you don't know anything that they don't want you to know. And as bad as it goes south, the government's supposed to make no laws. It only took them 7 years. 7 years to get in the way. Of course, the third president, Tommy Jefferson, let that law expire. Give the press its free rein, because that's the way it was originally designed, so that we know what's going on, or at least hopefully people are telling us the truth and we know what's going on. So the point of telling you that is, here we start with libertarian freedom. It's endorsed by everybody, and within 7 years, there's an encroachment. Well, after 9/11, we decided to encroach on 16 of the amendments. And we've thought it through, and we feel safer. It's got a sunset clause. It comes up for review periodically every, I think it's 4 years now, and we continue to reinforce it. And we feel safer. We haven't been attacked again. Ben said that's a trip down the wrong road to interfere with some of the basic freedoms we have. It's important for us today because we live in a world that's much different than it was back then. And so we've taken measures to try and procure or safeguard our freedoms. Ben says that's a mistake. Now, maybe Ben was right, maybe Ben wasn't. If you get caught up in the Patriot Act, the consequences of what that act says you're going to have to deal with. Any of you know what the Patriot Act says? We don't know. Okay, that's cool. You should read it sometime. It's really interesting. So I've had this odd fantasy since I was 16. I wanted to go to the Peace Corps. Speak languages real easy. Semitic languages aren't that hard. Shalom aleichem, assalamu alaikum. It's just not that hard. I've always had this fantasy. I'd go over to the Middle East. You do 2 years in the Peace Corps. Do a lot of good things for people. Make friends over there. Maybe come home once or twice to visit my kids, go back over, finish my tour of duty, make friends, finish my 2-year tour, come back. My friends over there continue to call me, speaking in their language. Como yo hablo en español, ellos no me comprenden. And one day there's a knock at my door. Do you know that you've been talking to terrorists overseas? No. Oh yeah. They're cell groups and they set us up. I mean, we do sting people ourselves here in the country, undercover. And they arrest me because I've been communicating overseas with a known terrorist that I didn't know was a terrorist. And they rendition you right away. Anybody know what rendition means? It means you disappear. No lawyer, no court, no judge. It's called a FISA court. And they rendition you. There's certain things we will do to our own people and certain things we won't. But we have allies that'll do things to people that we don't. I'll get into that on Thursday when I talk about torture. Israel is very good at it. Turkey's very good at it. Egypt's very good at it. You're gone. Nobody knows where you went. There's no explanation. Now, if you're really a terrorist, did I talk in here about that time I went to do counseling with a couple on a Friday night? Did I talk about that in here? I didn't? Okay, well, let me do that real quick and I'll get back to the lecture. So, we're back in America. This is a real experience with me, and I'm in this new town. I'm newly married, and I'm working for this agency, and we get a phone call Friday afternoon late. My wife and I have been in for counseling before. We're having problems. Could you maybe come by? I talked about that, right? Come by the house, and I'm traveling through town, and the police come to the door Monday night thinking, you know, some young girls turned me in. They thought I was cruising for little girls. Wrong place, wrong time. Haven't done anything wrong. That might happen with the Patriot Act too. We just don't know. But we feel safer. Anybody feel less secure since 9/11? We feel more secure. That's why we passed that act and why we continue to repass it time after time. Ben says that's a dangerous road. You give an inch, could easily lead to a mile. So any questions about Ben and why he says that's so important? Now, I'm not saying he's right. But if he is right and we find out too late, it's going to be too late. So just to kind of pique our interest. Okay. Well, the problem is we do have a need to protect ourselves. We talked about this last week when we talked about capital punishment. We get attacked. We have a right to defend ourselves. How do we defend ourselves? Well, it turns out in the West, we want to do this under a moral framework. So there's a gentleman named St. Thomas Aquinas. He's a Christian theologian, and he comes up with a theory for legitimizing when you go to war. You just can't go on a campaign of conquering. But if you're threatened, you have a right to defend yourself. So he comes up with what's called just war theory. You'll see this on your quiz. Just war theory has 3 parts, and they're in Latin. First one is jus ad bellum. That means declaring war, how we get into a war. Jus in bello. Once we're in the war, how do we fight the war? We don't fight all wars the same way. And finally, when the war's over, jus post bellum, how do we get out of the war? Now, there's a fella who's got a 5-minute video online for you. His name's Michael Walzer. If you need to review this just before you take your quiz, this is real short. He's very good. He points out all the things I'm going to point to you today. Jus in bellum. Now, you're going to see the language of the notes. Proposals to justify the use of force in a particular type of situation. What's the type of situation? War. Someone has attacked us. We have a right to defend ourselves. Warring nation against nation, self-defense. How about defense of the helpless? Should I mention my grandmother from Canada in here? I did, with the purse. Yeah, Grandma went to people's self-defense. She protected them. And finally, against countries that are committing genocide and ethnic cleansing. This happened in Kosovo under President Clinton's watch. So jus ad bellum, how we get into war. Once we get into war, considers the justice of particular types of actions within a war. So memory tickler for your test. A comes before I. You must be in the war before you can decide how you want to fight the war. Now, we have rules of engagement. We've already set those up. Periodically, they change. So at the end of World War II, we realized that if we had to invade Japan, probably 4 million lives were at stake. We already lost 300,000 GI lives. We figured, and they do this mathematical, we might lose another 100,000 GIs and probably over 3.5 million Japanese. The Army, the Navy, and the population, they're tenacious fighters, tenacious fighters. So to avoid that, we did a cost-benefit analysis in human lives and figured out if we dropped 2 atomic bombs, we would end the war. So we sent leaflets over Hiroshima and Nagasaki saying, on this date, we were going to drop a bomb and destroy your city. Well, no one had ever heard of one bomb that could destroy a city, so no one paid attention to the leaflets. They thought it was propaganda. So we dropped one bomb, and then 3 days later, we dropped the other bomb, and 136,000 civilian lives later, the war came to an end. Cost-benefit analysis. We think we saved about almost 4 million lives. Fast forward the Korean War, and we get literally kicked off the peninsula. We come back and we drive the Korean North Army all the way up to what's called the Yalu River, which is the northern border between North Korea and China. And Chinese amass 1 million troops that are going to come back across the border and drive us off the peninsula again. And General Douglas MacArthur calls President Truman, who okayed the 2 bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and said, I need a bomb. We'll take care of 1 million Chinese and the war will be over. And President Truman said, no. Change the rules of engagement. No more nukes, at least during that engagement. Okay? I mean, do I have former military in here? We do have tactical nukes. They're all over the place, but he said no to this. So he changed jus in bellum and bello, what we're allowed to use when it comes to prosecuting a war. Okay, and then finally, jus post bellum. How do we get out of a war? It's easy to get into a war. How do you get out of it? So at the end of World War I, the British and the French were so ticked at the Germans, they created what was called the Versailles Treaty. The Versailles Treaty literally put the boot heel of France and Germany on the neck of Germany England and France put the boot heel on the neck of Germany, and for 20 years the German people were still eating potatoes. They had no way to economically recover. Europe was so mad at what the Germans did. And so when Schicklgruber came along, you know Schicklgruber, right? Oh no, you know him as Hitler. His name was Schicklgruber. He promised him everything. I mean, I literally had a friend, German descent, born in America. She was over in Germany when Hitler came to power. She said it was amazing. He was like one of those charismatic people. He promised everybody a Volkswagen in every garage. You know what a Volkswagen? I mean, the Germans. It's like I shouldn't say it this way. It's like a Tesla. Give me money and I'll give you a car. He wanted 800 Deutschmarks. That's how he built the war machine. Full employment. Everybody in Germany went to the factories and built the war machine. And then they figured out what they had with Schicklgruber, and it was too late. His own military tried to kill him 11 times. The guy was charmed. Even when a bomb went up next to him in a meeting he had, right? It didn't kill him. Didn't kill him. That war comes to an end, and rather than putting the boot heel on him, we did something called the Marshall Plan. You guys know what the Marshall Plan is? We economically put Germany back on their feet, and we economically put Japan back on their feet, and now we have an ally in the East and we have an ally in Europe. Totally different way to end a war. Normally, you want to crush the opponent so they never do it again. That didn't work out real. It was only 20 years later. The first war was the war that would end all wars. 20 years later, another world war. So we got out of it jus post bellum, a different way. So you have three things to remember just war theory. Jus ad bellum, how we get into the war. Jus in bello, how we prosecute the war, how we fight the war. Jus post bellum, how do we end the war? How do we get out of the war at the end? You'll see those on your quiz, people. Okay, well, Thomas isn't done. He says, okay, well, how do we get into war? Three things are required. Number one, the authority of the sovereign by whose command the war is waged. In other words, who has the authority to make war? So in our system, who has the authority to declare war? President? Who else? Congress? President, Congress, President. How many people think it's the President? How many people think it's Congress? Where is it written, Congress? Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution states that only Congress has the power to declare war. It's in the Constitution. So why do we think the President does?
All my years in high school, they kind of alluded to the President what declares it. I mean, if you look at some of the work, like we did papers on about like the nuclear war, but then it was all about how Truman said it was okay. So that leads me to believe sometimes that the president's the one that's declaring and giving it okay.
For me, it was kind of like counter, but like in high school they teach you when they talk about the separation of powers, they teach you that yes, the president can do certain things, but because of the separation of powers, he can't do everything. With checks and balances, they teach you that Congress is the one that can declare war. Like with 9/11 and stuff, President George Bush declared war, but it really wasn't his say. It should have been Congress that had declared war.